The extraordinary and deeply emotional story I'm about to share with you today began on a sunny Saturday morning in May, precisely at 9 o'clock when most people were enjoying leisurely weekend breakfasts with family or catching up on sleep after long work weeks. When Antonio Costa was driving through an unfamiliar neighborhood on the other side of the city running errands and stopped at a red light next to a small community center where some kind of event or gathering was taking place, with people streaming in and out carrying covered dishes and children running around playing. Antonio was 58 years old, a successful import-export business owner who had spent the past 35 years building a company worth tens of millions of dollars through hard work, shrewd negotiations, and an obsessive attention to detail that extended to every aspect of his business operations and personal life, including maintaining strict control over his household staff and routines, and expecting perfection in all services provided to him. As Antonio sat waiting for the light to change, while idly observing the community center activity, he noticed a woman carrying a large pot of food walking toward the building entrance, and something about her profile and the way she moved sparked a shocking moment of recognition in his mind. Antonio stared intently, trying to get a better look at the woman's face, and when she turned slightly in his direction, his breath caught in his throat because he was suddenly certain that he was looking at Gabriela Mendez, the housekeeper who had worked in his home for 12 years before abruptly quitting without proper notice approximately 4 months ago, leaving Antonio angry and inconvenienced and forced to go through the annoying process of hiring and training a replacement who still wasn't performing at the level he expected and demanded. But as Antonio continued staring at this woman who looked exactly like Gabriela, he noticed details that didn't make sense, and that created profound confusion about what he was seeing. The woman was dressed nicely in clothes that looked new and expensive, rather than the worn, simple outfits Gabriela had always worn to work. Her hair was styled professionally, rather than pulled back in the utilitarian ponytail he remembered. And most strikingly, she was laughing and smiling radiantly while talking with other people in ways that Antonio had never witnessed during all the years she worked for him, when she had always been quiet and reserved and serious. The light changed to green, and cars behind Antonio started honking impatiently, forcing him to drive forward, but he immediately pulled over to the curb about half a block past the community center, unable to shake the unsettling feeling that he had just seen something important and confusing that demanded investigation and explanation. Antonio sat in his parked car for several minutes, debating with himself about whether to simply drive away and forget this strange encounter, or whether to go back to the community center and determine once and for all if that woman was actually Gabriela, and if so, what she was doing there and why she looked so different and so happy. His curiosity eventually won out over his pride and his reluctance to potentially embarrass himself by approaching someone who might turn out to be a complete stranger who just happened to resemble his former housekeeper, and he got out of his car and walked back to the community center with a mixture of determination and anxiety about what he might discover. When Antonio entered the community center, he found himself in a large multi-purpose room that was clearly set up for some kind of celebration or gathering, with tables arranged in rows covered with colorful tablecloths and laden with food, decorations hanging from the ceiling, and a diverse group of people of various ages mingling and laughing and obviously enjoying themselves. Antonio stood awkwardly near the entrance, feeling conspicuously out of place in his expensive casual clothes, among people who were mostly dressed more modestly, and who all seemed to know each other and be part of some community that he was not part of. And he scanned the room looking for the woman he thought was Gabriela. He spotted her across the room talking animatedly with a group of other women, and as he watched her interact with such ease and joy and confidence, he felt increasingly certain that this was indeed Gabriela, but also increasingly confused because this laughing animated woman bore almost no resemblance to the quiet, reserved employee he had known for over a decade. Antonio approached the group of women somewhat tentatively, and when he was close enough that Gabriela could see him clearly, her expression shifted dramatically from joy to shock and then to something that looked almost like fear, or at minimum deep discomfort. She excused herself from the other women and walked over to Antonio, asking in a quiet, controlled voice what he was doing there and how he had found her. and Antonio responded with more hostility than he had intended, asking why she was acting like he was stalking her when he had simply happened to drive past and recognized her, and was curious about why she had quit so suddenly without proper notice, and whether this gathering had anything to do with her unexplained departure from his employment. Gabriella glanced around at the other people in the room who were starting to notice this tense interaction between her and this well-dressed older man, who clearly didn't belong at their community event, and she asked Antonio if they could step outside to talk privately rather than having this conversation in front of her friends and community members. They walked out to the parking lot where Gabriella turned to face Antonio with an expression that was far more confident and direct than anything he had ever seen from her during their 12 years of employer-employee relationship, and she told him firmly that she didn't owe him any explanation about her personal life or her choices, but that she would tell him what had happened since she left his employment if he genuinely wanted to understand and not just interrogate or criticize. Antonio agreed somewhat defensively that yes, he wanted to understand, and Gabriella took a deep breath before beginning to explain in clear, precise terms that were completely unlike the deferential, hesitant manner she had always used when speaking with him previously. She told him that she had quit her position in his household because after 12 years of working for him, she had finally saved enough money and gathered enough courage to pursue the dreams and goals she had been putting off for over a decade, while she worked as a domestic employee to support her family and pay off debts and build some financial security. Gabriella explained that she had always wanted to be a teacher, that she had completed a teaching degree in her home country of Brazil before immigrating to this country 15 years ago, but had never been able to get her credentials recognized or find teaching positions because of language barriers and lack of connections and the need to immediately start earning income to support her family rather than investing time and money in additional education and certification processes. She described how she had spent the past 12 years working as a housekeeper for wealthy families, including Antonio, while taking online courses at night and on weekends to improve her English and complete the additional requirements needed to get teaching certification in this country, never mentioning any of this to Antonio or her other employers because she knew they viewed her only as a housekeeper and wouldn't be interested in her aspirations or goals beyond her ability to clean their homes adequately. She told Antonio that 4 months ago she had finally received her teaching certification and had been offered a full-time position teaching elementary school in a public school that served mostly immigrant and low-income students, a job that paid better than housekeeping and, more importantly, allowed her to finally use her education and skills to make meaningful difference in children's lives rather than spending her days cleaning other people's homes. She acknowledged that she should have given him more notice before leaving, but that the teaching position had needed to be filled immediately, and she had made the decision that she couldn't pass up this opportunity just to accommodate his convenience or preferences, given that he had never shown any interest in her as a person or any appreciation for the 12 years of dedicated service she had provided to his household. She said that the community center event he had stumbled upon was a celebration of a successful first semester for new teachers from the program she had completed, and that she was happier and more fulfilled now than she had been in years, because she was finally living according to her values and using her gifts rather than accepting limitations based on other people's narrow view of who she was and what she could do. Antonio listened to Gabriella's explanation with a complex mix of emotions, including surprise that this quiet housekeeper he thought he knew had such a rich interior life and ambitious goals he had never suspected, embarrassment that he had never bothered to ask about her background or aspirations during 12 years of daily interaction, defensive irritation at being implicitly criticized for not appreciating her service adequately, and grudging respect for her determination to improve her circumstances and pursue meaningful work despite the obstacles she had faced. He found himself asking questions about her teaching position and the students she worked with, genuinely curious now about aspects of her life that he had never considered important enough to inquire about when she was cleaning his house. Gabriella relaxed slightly as she talked about her students, her passion and commitment evident as she described working with immigrant children who reminded her of her own struggles, learning English and adapting to a new country. helping kids who came from difficult home situations find safety and encouragement in the classroom, teaching not just academic content, but also critical thinking and confidence and belief that education could open doors to better futures. As Antonio listened to Gabriela talk with such animation and joy about her teaching work, he was struck by the profound disconnect between who she actually was as a complete human being with education and skills and dreams, and the extremely limited role he had assigned her in his mind as simply the woman who cleaned his house. He realized with uncomfortable clarity that he had worked alongside this person for 12 years, seeing her multiple times per week for over a decade, and he had never once asked her about her life beyond work, or shown any curiosity about who she was as a person beyond her function in his household. He had paid her reasonably but not generously, despite his wealth, had criticized her work frequently while rarely offering appreciation or recognition when she did things well, had treated her as essentially invisible and interchangeable with any other competent housekeeper, rather than as an individual with unique qualities and worth. The recognition of his own blindness and his failure to see Gabriela's full humanity was deeply unsettling, forcing Antonio to question patterns he had followed throughout his life of viewing service workers and employees primarily as instruments to serve his needs rather than as complete people deserving respect and genuine interest. Antonio found himself apologizing to Gabriela somewhat awkwardly and sincerely, saying that he regretted never taking time to know her better or to appreciate the quality of her work and her dedication over so many years, and that he was genuinely happy for her success in achieving her dreams even if her departure had been inconvenient for him. Gabriela accepted his apology graciously, but also told him honestly that his treatment of her had never been cruel or abusive, just consistently indifferent and dismissive in ways that had made her feel invisible and undervalued, and that she hoped he might consider treating his new housekeeper and his other employees with more genuine interest and respect for them as complete human beings, rather than just evaluating them based on how well they performed services for him. She suggested that if he was genuinely interested in learning more about the lives and experiences of people like her who worked in domestic service, he might consider attending some community events or supporting organizations that helped immigrants and working families, offering to send him information about programs that could use volunteers or donors if he was open to becoming more connected to communities beyond his usual wealthy social circles. Antonio surprised himself by accepting Gabriela's offer and asking for that information, genuinely curious now about worlds and experiences he had been essentially ignorant of despite living in the same city for decades. They exchanged contact information with Antonio, giving Gabriela his personal email rather than his work email, and as they prepared to part ways, Gabriela hesitated and then said something that would prove to be prophetic and transformative. She told Antonio that he seemed lonely despite his obvious wealth and success, that in 12 years of working in his home, she had never seen him with friends or family visitors and had noticed that he seemed to work constantly and to have no life or relationships beyond his business, and that she hoped for his sake that he would find ways to build genuine connections with people and to experience life beyond just accumulation and achievement, because wealth without relationship and purpose was ultimately empty and sad. She said this gently and with obvious compassion rather than judgment, and Antonio felt unexpected tears prick his eyes because her observation was so accurate and because nobody had bothered to express concern about his well-being or his isolation in longer than he could remember. Antonio drove home from that encounter in a strange, contemplative mood, unable to stop thinking about everything Gabriela had said and about his own patterns of relating to people purely transactionally without investing in genuine knowing or caring beyond what served his immediate interests. He found himself noticing for the first time, really looking at his current housekeeper, Maria, when she arrived on Monday morning to clean, seeing a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes and a quiet dignity that he had never bothered to notice before because he was always too focused on whether she had cleaned thoroughly enough or organized things exactly how he wanted. Antonio did something completely unprecedented by actually initiating conversation with Maria, asking her about her weekend and her family and how long she had been working as a housekeeper, questions that clearly surprised her given that he had employed her for over 3 months without showing the slightest interest in her as a person beyond evaluating her work performance. Maria responded cautiously at first, as if worried this unusual attention might be a test or trick. But as she realized Antonio's interest seemed genuine, she began sharing information about her life, including her 2 teenage children, who were both good students but struggling with typical adolescent challenges, her husband who worked in construction and whose income was irregular and unpredictable, making family finances constantly stressful, her own dreams of eventually opening a small catering business using her cooking skills that everyone always praised, but that she had never had resources or time to develop into an actual business. Antonio found himself actually listening with interest, rather than just waiting for her to finish talking so he could give her instructions about cleaning tasks, and he started asking follow-up questions that demonstrated genuine curiosity about her experiences and aspirations. Over the following weeks and months, Antonio continued these conversations with Maria and began applying similar interest and attention to other service providers and employees he interacted with, including his office cleaning staff, restaurant servers, his barber, his dry cleaner, all people he had previously treated as essentially invisible functions rather than as complete human beings with their own stories and struggles and dreams. The information Gabriela had sent Antonio about volunteer opportunities and community organizations led him to attend an orientation session at a nonprofit that provided ESL classes and job training and support services to immigrant families. And Antonio was struck by meeting dozens of people who were working multiple low-wage jobs while trying to learn English and navigate complex systems and support families, often including children and elderly relatives, all while dealing with language barriers and discrimination and fear about immigration status and uncertainty about their futures. The director of the nonprofit mentioned during the orientation that they desperately needed volunteers with business experience who could help immigrant entrepreneurs develop business plans and understand financial basics and navigate the complicated process of starting legal businesses. And Antonio found himself volunteering to help in this capacity, partly out of genuine interest and partly because Gabriela's observation about his loneliness and isolation had struck a chord and made him recognize how empty his life had become despite his material success. Antonio began spending several hours every week at the nonprofit, helping immigrant entrepreneurs, including reviewing business concepts, teaching basic financial literacy, helping people understand contracts and regulations, and connecting them with resources and contacts that could help them succeed. He met remarkable people with incredible determination and creativity who were trying to build better lives for their families against enormous odds and obstacles. People who worked harder than most wealthy people Antonio knew, but who still struggled financially because of systemic barriers and lack of access to capital and connections. He found himself genuinely enjoying this work and these relationships in ways he hadn't enjoyed his own business in years, recognizing that helping someone develop a catering business or a cleaning company or a landscaping service felt more meaningful and satisfying than negotiating another import contract or increasing his own already substantial profit margins by a few percentage points. One of the entrepreneurs Antonio began working with was a woman named Carmen, who wanted to start a home care agency providing services to elderly clients who needed assistance with daily living activities but wanted to remain in their homes rather than moving to institutional care facilities. Carmen had worked as a caregiver for various families for over 15 years and had extensive experience and excellent references, but no business background or access to capital or knowledge about how to actually start and operate a legal agency rather than just working informally for individual clients. Antonio helped Carmen develop a comprehensive business plan, connected her with a lawyer who could help with incorporation and contracts, introduced her to potential investors and lenders, and even provided some initial capital himself as a small business loan on favorable terms because he believed in her vision and her her capabilities. As Carmen's business began to launch and grow, she hired several other caregivers, including some who had previously worked in domestic service like housekeeping, but who wanted to transition to healthcare-related work with better pay and more professional recognition. Through his work at the non-profit and his conversations with Maria and other service workers he encountered, Antonio began understanding on a visceral level the enormous challenges faced by people working in low-wage service industries, including unpredictable schedules, lack of benefits like health insurance or paid sick leave, vulnerability to employer exploitation, constant financial stress making it nearly impossible to save money or invest in education or deal with unexpected emergencies, and the psychological toll of being treated as invisible or inferior by the wealthy people they served. He started using his business connections and his credibility as a successful entrepreneur to advocate for better policies and practices, speaking to other business owners about the importance of paying living wages and providing benefits, and treating all employees with dignity regardless of their job titles or functions, writing op-eds for local business publications about why companies should invest in their workers and why exploitation was not only morally wrong, but actually economically counterproductive in the long term. Antonio's growing awareness and activism led him to make significant changes in his own business practices, including substantially raising wages for his lowest-paid employees, implementing comprehensive benefits, including health insurance and retirement contributions for all staff, including part-time and contract workers, creating clearer pathways for advancement and skills training that allowed people to move from entry-level positions into higher-paying roles with more responsibility, and establishing a more respectful and inclusive culture where every employee, regardless of position, was treated as a valued contributor rather than a replaceable cog. These changes were initially resisted by some of his management team, who worried about increased costs, reducing competitiveness, but Antonio discovered that the improvements in employee morale and retention and productivity actually made the business more profitable over time as turnover decreased and workers became more engaged and committed when they felt valued and respected. The transformation in Antonio's personal life was even more dramatic than the changes in his professional sphere. He began hosting dinner parties at his home not for business networking purposes, but just to bring together interesting people from different backgrounds and communities, including nonprofit leaders, immigrant entrepreneurs, teachers like Gabriela, activists, artists, and others he had met through his volunteer work and community engagement. These gatherings were lively and stimulating in ways his previous formal business dinners had never been, with genuine conversation and laughter and debate about ideas and values rather than just strategic positioning and deal-making. Antonio discovered that he genuinely enjoyed connecting with people from diverse backgrounds and hearing about their experiences and perspectives that were so different from his own previous social circles of wealthy business owners who all thought similarly and whose conversations had become boring and repetitive. His relationship with Maria evolved from employer-employee into something approaching friendship, with Antonio genuinely caring about her family's well-being and occasionally offering help that went beyond just paying her wages, including connecting her teenage son with a mentor when he was struggling in school and needed positive adult guidance, providing references that helped Maria's husband get steadier construction work with better pay and benefits, and eventually helping Maria take the first steps toward starting her catering business by connecting her with Carmen, who had successfully navigated the same entrepreneurial journey. Maria was initially uncomfortable accepting help that felt like charity rather than earned compensation, but Antonio learned to frame his assistance as investment in someone he believed in and whose success would benefit her entire family and community. And eventually, Maria accepted that his support came from genuine care and respect rather than from pity or condescension. The romantic dimension of the story emerged unexpectedly approximately approximately 18 months after Antonio's encounter with Gabriela outside the community center, when Antonio and Carmen, who had been working closely together on growing her home care agency, gradually developed feelings that went beyond professional partnership into genuine attraction and emotional connection. Carmen was 45 years old, divorced with 2 adult children, strong and capable and warm with a sense of humor that made Antonio laugh in ways he hadn't laughed in decades. She had no interest in Antonio's money or status, had initially been somewhat wary of him because of their class differences and because wealthy men had not been kind to her in her previous experiences, but she had come to genuinely like and respect him as she witnessed his authentic commitment to helping immigrant entrepreneurs and his willingness to examine his own privilege and prejudices rather than just offering superficial charity or performative allyship. They began dating cautiously, both aware of the potential complications given their different backgrounds and the power dynamics created by Antonio's initial role as business advisor and lender to Carmen's startup. But they found that they genuinely enjoyed each other's company and could talk for hours about everything from business strategy to family dynamics to dreams for the future. Carmen challenged Antonio in ways nobody else in his life ever had, calling him out when he was being oblivious to his privilege, or when his business advice was impractical for someone without his resources and connections, helping him understand the real lived experiences of working families, rather than just theoretical discussions about poverty and inequality. Antonio supported Carmen's entrepreneurial dreams, while also helping her navigate challenges she faced as a Latina business owner in industries dominated by white men, using his connections to open doors while being careful not to overshadow her accomplishments or make her feel like she owed her success to his intervention rather than her own capabilities and hard work. When Gabriela learned through their occasional email correspondence that Antonio was dating Carmen, who Gabriela knew from community circles, she was initially concerned about the power dynamics and the potential for Antonio to hurt Carmen, either intentionally or through his obliviousness to the challenges faced by working-class women. But when Gabriela saw them together at a community event and witnessed the genuine affection and respect and partnership between them, she felt reassured and even happy that Antonio had apparently learned the lessons she had tried to teach him about seeing people's full humanity and building authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy and transaction. Gabriela told Carmen privately that Antonio seemed like a genuinely different person from the man she had worked for, that she could see real transformation in how he interacted with people and how he seemed to actually care about others' well-being rather than just viewing everyone through the lens of how they could serve his interests. Antonio proposed to Carmen approximately 2 years after they started dating, doing so in a way that honored her values and their shared journey, rather than being ostentatious or focused on expensive gestures. He proposed at the celebration party for Carmen's business, reaching its first major milestone of serving 100 clients, surrounded by the caregivers she employed and the families they served and the community that had supported her entrepreneurial journey, making clear that he wasn't asking her to leave her world and join his isolated, wealthy existence, but rather was asking permission to join her world and be part of the community and purpose she had built. Carmen said yes with joy, and also with clear-eyed awareness of the ongoing work required to navigate their different backgrounds and to build a partnership that honored both of their experiences and values without either person having to pretend to be someone they weren't or abandon important aspects of their identity. The wedding brought together Antonio's business associates and wealthy friends, many of whom had never interacted socially with working-class immigrants and were initially uncomfortable but ultimately moved by the warmth and generosity and joy displayed by Carmen's extended family and community. Several of Antonio's wealthy acquaintances privately told him they were impressed by Carmen's accomplishments and character, and that watching the wedding celebration had made them think differently about their own attitudes towards service workers and immigrant communities. Antonio's best man speech included emotional acknowledgement of how meeting Gabriela years ago outside that community center had catalyzed his transformation from someone who saw people only as functions to someone who tried to see everyone's full humanity and worth. And Gabriela, who attended as Carmen's guest, was moved to tears by Antonio's public recognition of her role in his journey, even though she insisted she had simply told him things he needed to hear and that the real credit belonged to him for being willing to actually listen and change. Today, 4 years after that May morning when Antonio happened to drive past the community center and caught a glimpse of the housekeeper he thought he knew, living a completely different life than he had ever imagined, Antonio and Carmen are happily married and have built a life together that bridges their different worlds while honoring both. Antonio has sold his import-export business to focus full-time on supporting immigrant entrepreneurs and advocating for workers' rights and equitable business practices, using his wealth and connections to create opportunities rather than just accumulating more for himself. Carmen's home care agency has grown substantially and now employs over 50 caregivers providing services to hundreds of elderly clients, and she has become a recognized leader in the immigrant business community, mentoring other entrepreneurs, particularly women trying to start service-based businesses. Antonio has maintained his friendship with Maria, who successfully launched her catering business and now employs several other immigrants, providing both delicious food and good jobs with fair wages and benefits. He stays in touch with Gabriella, who continues teaching and whose students consistently show remarkable progress and who receives recognition for her excellent work helping immigrant children succeed academically and emotionally. Most importantly, Antonio has built a rich network of genuine friendships and meaningful relationships across different communities and backgrounds, discovering that connection and purpose and contributing to others' well-being brings far more satisfaction than wealth and status ever did during his years of isolation and superficial achievement. The deeper truth of this story goes far beyond Antonio's personal transformation, though that journey is certainly central and compelling. The real lesson is about the profound invisibility of service workers in our society and how people who clean our homes and care for our elderly and cook our food and perform essential labor that makes our comfortable lives possible are often treated as less than fully human by the people they serve, seen only as functions rather than as complete people with education and skills and dreams and rich interior lives. It teaches us that we are surrounded by remarkable people every day who we fail to see because we've been socialized to view them through the lens of their job titles and social class rather than recognizing their inherent worth and potential. This story reminds us that transformation is possible at any age and that we can always choose to examine our biases and change our behaviors and build more authentic relationships based on genuine curiosity and respect rather than hierarchy and transaction. It shows us that supporting others' dreams and using whatever privilege and resources we have to create opportunities rather than just accumulating more for ourselves is actually the path to meaning and fulfillment that purely selfish achievement can never provide. It challenges us to interrogate our own patterns of seeing and treating people, to ask whether we're truly engaging with everyone we encounter as complete human beings worthy of interest and respect, or whether we're maintaining comfortable distances and hierarchies that allow us to benefit from others' labor while avoiding any real relationship or recognition of our interdependence. Most fundamentally, this story teaches that the people we dismiss as unimportant or interchangeable often have the most to teach us about resilience and determination and finding meaning beyond material success, that opening ourselves to learning from people we've been taught to look down upon can transform not just our individual lives, but can also inspire us to work toward more just and equitable systems that honor everyone's dignity and potential, regardless of their economic circumstances, or the work they do to survive. If this story moved you and made you think about the service workers in your own life and whether you're truly seeing and respecting them as complete human beings, please leave a like on this video so I know this content resonates. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future stories about transformation and authentic connection across boundaries of class and background. And please share in the comments your own experiences with realizing you had been blind to someone's full humanity, or times when someone you initially dismissed or overlooked taught you important lessons or changed your perspective, because your stories help all of us remain humble and open to learning from everyone we encounter, regardless of their social status or the roles they play in our lives.